Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick one on the Tigerism Sun Wukong. So as usual, this is a Tigerism set with another nice, very nice looking shell. Has a special 14.2 millimeter dynamic driver inside. Packaging very nice. Cable is super nice. This is a really nice black 2-core. I think they've used this one before, but very typical looking insulation. The really dark black with the gold flakes. I've seen this on various versions of this cable. This is a very expensive version of the cable because it's very thick 2-core, but there are other versions with thinner core sizes, but you get the same feel for very black gold flakes. Always looks very nice, always looks very classy. But yeah, I think, as usual, I think they do a really nice job on their shells. The packaging, there's not a ton of things inside this one. You do get the little pouch for your shells, for your IMs, I mean. A nice little design on the front. Inside, you do get another couple pair of tips, and you do get the Tigerism case as well. So, yep, overall, quite nice. I think on all their sets, they tend to have done really nice packaging, accessories, all that stuff tends to look pretty nice. So what is special on this one? As I said, it's a 14.2 millimeter dynamic driver, and it has a $700 price tag. This is a pricey dynamic driver. There's sort of no doubt about it. It is up there with Tigerism was associated with MIM's Dark Magician. So yeah, I think that they are, there's some history there of charging this much for a single dynamic driver, but every time you see one and every time you hear one, it's still kind of shocking. Like, it's a single dynamic driver, $700. It really needs to have a binary wow moment, is what I will call it. And sets like this one, it's a single dynamic driver with such a high price tag. It really needs to have an immediate wow moment. Something's got to stand out. You've got to say to yourself, this does something that I haven't heard before in another single dynamic driver, hybrid. Whatever it is, there needs to be this immediate wow. Otherwise, there's almost no coping with this one. There is no saying that it sounds good for the price because they set the price so high. It either meets your expectations, exceeds your expectations, or it doesn't. And I think sets like this are very, very difficult because it becomes a binary. No one's going to keep it and say, well, I'll burn it in for a couple of weeks and it'll sound better, or I'll get used to it. This one's got to hit you right up front immediately. I love this set. Otherwise, you're probably not going to keep it. So, but in terms of that, I do want to also, because I forgot to thank Apos Audio. This is a loaner from Apos Audio. So no, I'm not keeping it. This one will go back to them as well. But I do very much appreciate it, having spent some time with it. But yeah, very much. I wasn't actually kind of blown away right out front. And some of it comes down to this. The sound signature is a sub-bass upper V style, upper mid V style, like I said. Not unique, but not really expected, as it tends to sound like peaks and valleys, as it does here. And when we take a look at the graph, you can kind of see what's going on here. And yes, I've heard some expensive dynamic drivers. I do have Twilight. And what you sort of take away from Twilight, and you kind of ignore the differences in the bass. I think they do bass differently and the venting, all that stuff. And I think Tigerism's Wukong, I think that that bass shelf is actually kind of fine. It's a nice glide. It's got plenty of sub bass. It's got some little mid bass there. But what you really notice is a lot of sub bass and a lot of upper mid, lower treble. When they sort of tend to roll this off a little bit early, this level is lower. You kind of see where Twilight is in the blue and where Wukong is. These levels in the treble and the upper treble going to be kind of hard to hear. And the contribution of this back into the mids is just not what I was expecting. I think on a single dynamic driver, I think you do need a really smooth treble style shelf like that has a nice arc to it, there aren't that many peaks and valleys to it. And what you get with Wukong is some really deep kind of high peaks as well. Yeah, really tough. Just looking at the graph, it was going to be tough to pull off. But yeah, in ear, it pretty much sounds the way it graphs. There's just these really deep troughs are kind of hard to get they just sound, there's a stark contrast between the troughs and the peaks, and you'll hear the two at the same time, and it's noticeable. It's not like, oh, this sounds a little bit different. It's just kind of noticeably something sounds a little bit different here. So the bass, I'll say that 14.2 millimeter expectations again. Again, this is going to be a really difficult, high price point, big dynamic driver. You're expecting huge impact, huge rumble, huge bass definition, texture. You're expecting something to stand out. What was going to be the wow moment on this one? And I didn't quite get it. I'll say it sounds okay. It's definitely the best part of the set, but it doesn't really have the quality of some dual dynamic drivers that we've listened to recently, and even some single dynamic drivers like Pilgrim. I think Pilgrim had a pretty outstanding single dynamic driver. It was a standout. It was kind of immediately noticeable how that thing kind of hit hard and hit fast, and there was a really nice definition to it. And this one didn't quite get there. And then on the mids, I think tracks that are lower centric, not just bassy tracks, but something like the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby, it just tends to be a bit lower male vocals. There isn't a whole lot of treble happening there, but those tended to sound pretty nice on this because of the signature, because of, everything from here back sounds pretty much right, and this isn't all that strange. It was only until you get into the treble and the upper treble when tracks really relied on that, where you sort of notice that things were a little bit more off. But any track that has more treble dependency, I will say it sounds a little less coherent due to those uneven levels, and it really deeply affects the mids. But the lower bits, and for the most part, I think those kind of worked out okay. But as I was talking about, the treble, very heavy lower level. This is the bulk of the treble contribution to the sound. But at the same time, it also makes up a heavy contribution to most tracks. So sets tend to use this signature because music can actually sound pretty reasonable with this style signature. But, eventually you will notice that there is something a little off when you get into upper range treble. You sort of say, well, there's some peakiness to it, or there's some things that are missing to it. But as you get into $700 price points, there really is an expectation of a smooth, balanced level of treble all the way through air and extension. And that's sort of what we see with Twilight exactly, right? As it comes around the upper mids into the treble area, it just basically arcs down. You can ignore the 8K from my coupler, but a really smooth curve, almost following the Harman target, just set back another decibel or two, but really smooth curve, real consistent, all the way from lower, all the way through upper, really all the way through air. And then when you look at Tigerism, this level is just going to be hard to hear. You're going to hear the peaks, and then the troughs you're probably not going to hear at all, is really what happens on this one. So like I was just saying, the dip from 4 to 6K, very difficult to get right as you hear it right in that vocal clarity and presence. Too much and the vocals have a natural bright spot. Too little and the vocals sound a little closed or muffled or obstructed, and that's exactly what they sound like on Wukong. Combine a lower level of presence with an early roll-off of the upper treble, and you end up with a really difficult sound, a really difficult situation to sound natural, and that's exactly what happens here. Those two contributions our ears expect and are caught in the peaks and the valleys. Some sounds are there, some are quite low. It's very difficult to sound like mid-fi or upper mid-fi, because this one's a $700 set, with an uneven response like I was talking about. You really do need quite a smooth treble response to really pull this off. And even on a dynamic driver, which can do end-to-end coherency, right? It's only a single driver, it can do that quite well. But yeah, you really need kind of a smoother response to really pull that off. And really what happens is the stage and the imaging, the separation, all these things that have a reliance on treble and upper treble and even some air, all those things are affected by this lower treble level and the lack of sort of the upper treble level. It just has a closed in and smaller sound to it. And you don't have to really think too much about what was going to happen with all the technical aspects of this set because of the response that you see in the treble. The treble doesn't just affect the treble, it affects everything, and you really hear it on a set like this, which has some level here, no level, no level, no level, and then it kind of pops up a little bit. Very, very hard to pull off a very natural sound when you have a situation like this, and that's kind of exactly what happens on Wukong. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Thank you Apos Audio for loaning this one to me. I will send it back to you. But again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.